Engage.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
I am the one who knocks. Call!
Hey there, I'm Ashley Zanter.
I'm Scott Nielsen.
And I'm Jessica K. Richards.
And you're listening to UniversiTV. So, Jess, what are we talking about this week?
So this week we're talking about The Good Place. So we've watched all the episodes of The Good Place, and we're going to kind of talk about its sort of placement in TV history and the ways that it interacts with a bunch of sort of different comedic shows. I wanted to give you a brief sort of summary of what The Good Place is. So The Good Place is about the afterlife of Eleanor Shellstrop, played by Kristen Bell. In the pilot, we find out she died in a horrifying / humiliating grocery store parking lot accident. She arrives at the Good Place, a tranquil paradise that serves heaps and tons of frozen yogurt. The only problem is that Eleanor isn't supposed to be there.
Ooh.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so it's a pretty interesting show. It's created by Michael Schur, who did some really other important work like Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Are they important or just delightful?
I think they're important. I mean, that's one of the problems with comedy. It's like everybody wants to treat it like it's not meaningful. Yeah. And I actually think it is meaningful. Just because Aristotle didn't finally write the treatise about what comedy was doesn't mean that it's not worth something. So
yeah, I mean, Parks and Rec is honestly one of my favorite shows, like of all time.
Absolutely.
I think it's way better than The Office, and I mean, Brooklyn Nine-Nine is like, in my opinion, one of, if not the best show on Fox right now,
right,
in terms of comedy.
Yep.
So The Good Place, I saw that and I was like, sold. I know I'm gonna like this show. It's gonna be really, really good.
Well, and like he did The Office too, you know, or he wrote for The Office. He was sort of a part of that. And so I think he's got some really innovative stuff that he's trying to do with comedy. And I think that that's really worth talking about. So where we kind of thought we'd start this week was we wanted to start with kind of a broader discussion of how comedy has changed a little bit over time, specifically with like the laugh track. So The Good Place does not actually feature the laugh track, and I kind of wanted to get into that a little bit. Like,
the laugh track is terrible. It's absolutely terrible, and I don't know why we're still using it.
Well, so like some really popular shows still use it.
Absolutely, The Big Bang Theory uses
when
it.
you have those like multi-camera, like it's on a set, it's the obvious, like, cool, this is basically a filmed play. Like, I expect the laugh track, but for, you know, single camera shot, like when you know it's on a soundstage, like Community, The Good Place, a lot of that, like, I don't expect it.
Right.
So it's like sort of the format dictates to me whether it should be there or not.
Right. Well, that's...
Sure.
Well, but that's the question is like, so it's such a feature of how television went down for such a long time. Like what makes it so that we feel comfortable not having it all of a sudden?
Well, I think probably like, if we talk about like being in the golden age of television, where like we have so many shows and so many of them good. So in doing like a little bit of research on the laugh track, so apparently the first use was they had like the Bing Crosby radio show back in the day, and they get this like folksy kind of farm-bred comedian on there, and he tells a bunch of lewd stories. Like, I mean, they're probably fine by today's standard, but back in the day, like super racy stuff. And like the audience just goes nuts and they're laughing and just boiling over. And they're like, well, the laughter's great, but we can't use this stuff. Like, we'll be sued. So the producer just says, record the laughter. And then a little bit later, they've got this program that just is not funny, is not good, but they put the laughter over it, right? So I think fundamentally, a laugh track is just to be like, hey, this show's probably not that funny, but we're going to trick people into thinking it is.
Well, and that's one of my big problems with the Big Bang Theory. I mean, you probably have all seen the YouTube videos where they strip the laugh track out. Have you ever?
So sad.
Yeah, they're horrible to each other. I mean, they are absolutely the most terrible human beings.
Yeah. Saying
these things to each other, and you see the reactions on their faces, and they're devastated when this stuff goes down. It's like, it's hard to watch. So how that sort of intersects with, I just wonder if like we're more comfortable with comedy being a personal experience rather than a public one.
Oh, see, I would flip it.
Because part of what happens with Laugh Track is that it allows you to be invited to laugh, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it makes it okay for you to laugh. And so now we're sort of like, oh, I'm cool. I don't need any sort of, social signals or a general sense that I'm supposed to. Or maybe we're just sort of more adapted to comedic, versions of things.
I think for me, especially coming from a theater background, where, doing comedy shows or, being up on stage, like so much of like theater and being in a play is a collective experience between the actors and the audience, right? And you sort of all have this experience together and you laugh together. And it's the same thing anytime you go to a comedy in a movie theater, right? You're all experiencing this movie or this play or performance together. And it's a collective experience. Mm-hmm. Whereas now I think comedy's much more targeted and poignant, and especially with more highbrow comedy rather than, base common denominator. It's a personal experience that you can have in your home and really enjoy with yourself or a couple friends or just, a spouse. And I think it's about the style, right? Of like how we interact with TV and how we interact with comedy is really dictating, whether or not a laugh track is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, most TV watching is a solitary activity now, right? When you have streaming services on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer that go to your TV, you're not always watching TV with somebody else. A lot of times you're watching TV by yourself. And so I think that the laugh track is really interesting because laughter is a social experience. It's something we do when we're in larger groups or when we're in groups in general, when we're more than by ourselves. I mean, that's the big joke where when you actually type someone LOL, you just sort of, right? You didn't actually laugh out loud, but you're conveying that because laughing is a social experience. But most of the time, humor is experienced on like an individual basis, and especially when you're only encountering it by yourself. I think that the laugh track, it does a weird thing then, where it's like, oh, well, now there's a group, so now you can laugh even at the thing that's not very funny.
Well, and the thing that troubles me about that, or that like is interesting, is like, does that fundamentally change the comedy that's available? Right? When you don't have the laugh track that is permissive, does the comedy itself change? Because you can't be as offensive, right? Because there's not a signal for somebody to go, actually, it's okay to laugh here. We made it okay.
I think the comedy has to be better.
Okay.
Well, but at the same time, like, it can't be dark. Mm-hmm. Like, it can't be, like, when you talk about, like, black comedy, like, you can't have a laugh track that goes, oh. Like, like there's some comedy there. Like, there's some things that comedies I've watched where you just, like, you're so just shocked by what was said that you don't laugh, but it's entertaining nonetheless.
Right.
So, I mean, laugh track comedy is basically like, we're going to make the easy joke. We're going to make the obvious joke that's going to get a big laugh, and everyone can be like, cool, this is a joke we're all in on. This isn't a joke for people in this position. This isn't a joke for one group. This is a joke that as a culture and a collective group, we can all say, yeah, we all think farts are funny. We all think slipping on banana peels are funny. And we all think saying quippy things to your dad is funny, Eric. Because like that 70s show is like the quintessential laugh track for me. Right. And I love that show. But when I go back and rewatch it, like in this era, I don't actually think it's that good. Mm-hmm. In fact, I have a lot of problems with it just from like when viewing TV shows in different points of your life and how you change.
Right. Well, I had the same experience with Friends. When it dropped on Netflix, I binged watched it again with my husband, who had never seen it before. And it was kind of shocking to me a little bit how unfunny it was. Like, I was a little bit disappointed, and I don't think I'm going to have that same experience with some of Michael Schur's shows. I mean, I think he actually has something that's really lasting. He has characters that go beyond the sort of trope that he's assigned them. I mean, Ron Swanson is a super nuanced character, mm-hmm. And he's going to be somebody who's valuable for a long time.
Sure. Well, I mean, and it really comes down to like, these are people with flaws, but they're all generally likable. They all have something positive to bring that up. Where Friends is really just like, insert general archetypal joke here, where none of them are actually good people or good friends.
Plus, how did they afford that apartment?
No one knows.
Well,
that's the fun.
So they can afford the one because it's rent controlled. How Joey and Chandler afford the other one on Joey's, piss poor actor money. That's the greatest mystery. Also, like, Ross, who is the worst friend? Because I'm pretty sure it's Ross, but Rachel is right up there.
So, okay, I definitely think it's Ross, but
Rachel. Okay, so on that controversial, well, no, I think you're right. I think Michael Schur's shows do have some staying power. The one quibble I want to make with Michael Schur, at least in regards to The Good Place, is the pacing of the show. So if you've seen it, it's interesting because the episodes have titles, but every time a new episode starts, it says chapter. So there's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So it's trying to do this like book thing. But at the same time, what I'm seeing happen, and I think we'll start to see this trend happening more broadly on network television especially, but our pacing is changing to accommodate binge watching, which I find absolutely fascinating, because if you look at some of the Netflix originals, I mean, if you look at Love, for example, it's paced very specifically so that not too many things happen in any given episode, but every episode ends on some kind of cliffhanger. And the idea is that you're supposed to click next. Right? You're supposed to go watch the next thing. And so a ton happens over the course of the season, but if you look at individual episodes, they're not terribly eventful. And the 20 minutes usually goes by pretty quickly because you're like, oh, was that it? But The Good Place is a week-to-week show. It is a network show. And so I think it's fascinating that a week-to-week show like The Good Place is trying to pace itself to think forward to when it is available on streaming services so that people who come to the show late can binge watch it with more effectiveness than people who watched it week to week.
Well, and I think the big part there, and I think this is really where the architecture comes in, is that Michael Schur was doing a lot to sort of mimic Lost. I really think that, so he's mentioned that as an influence. And I think that you can tell because in most of the episodes in Lost, what would happen is be like, Jack runs up a hill. Jack finds water, right? Like those were the plots of Lost. And you can kind of see the same stuff with The Good Place, right? Where the plots are really simple. It's like, Eleanor learns how to fly. Eleanor talks to her friends, right? Like these are not complex in it. They throw a party. Mm-hmm. It's a sad party, right? Like there aren't very many things happening in terms of the actual movement of the show. It's more about the ideas, and that's something very sort of J.J. Abrams-esque or something, that there isn't a lot that's sort of substantive. What I like about The Good Place is that I think that typically it does those things better than Lost ever did, right? That it engages with those ideas in a lot more sort of clear, concise way that makes them accessible to viewers instead of getting lost in a bunch of gobbledygook.
Right.
So,
I concede to that point. I also just found the viewing experience really frustrating at certain parts, especially because I did watch it week to week. And so I know I'm a total sucker.
You plebe.
A total sucker. And so I did watch it week to week, and I enjoyed Kristen Bell's performances. I enjoyed Ted Danson's performance. I enjoy how the show is approaching this really complicated thing, right? The afterlife. But I just always felt frustrated that like I would tune in, not much would happen, big cliffhanger, then I had to wait 7 days. And so in that space where how I was trying to engage with this material, I found it very frustrating. Whereas had I watched it later on, if I had just binged the whole 13 episodes on Hulu or whatever, I think I would have had a much more enjoyable experience.
Well, I can't speak for that experience because I binge watched it. But one thing that I noticed, and I've noticed again generally, that I almost enjoy the week-to-week experience because Game of Thrones I keep up on, and there's some simulcast stuff that I enjoy watching, and there's sort of this like endorphin that comes out. It's like, cool, here's my fix. I got to wait a whole nother week, and that's something to look forward to and get really excited about. But when you consume everything, it's kind of like, cool, rush of heroin right there. Put the needle in my arm. And I found with The Good Place, I kept thinking that it was the end of the season before it actually was. Like talking about pacing in terms of like, so around episode 10, I was like, is this the last episode? I think this is. Gets to the episode, it's like, nope, one more, right? And I think, okay, this is the last episode. And I kept feeling like it was on that track. And I don't know if that's, the streaming tactic or the week-to-week tactic, but that was kind of my experience when I was streaming through it. Just that constant like, okay, get to resolution. And
I think in terms of like how the show's content works, right? When Eleanor confesses that she's not supposed to be there, isn't that like episode 8 out of 13?
No, I don't think so.
I think it's
Oh, you mean to everyone?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. No, when she confesses in the first episode that she's not supposed to be there.
Yes.
But then she opens up to the entire Good Place community,
that's
300 something people.
I think that's the end of 5 or 6.
And it's really early on. And I remember, Jessica, you were telling me that you were watching this with your husband, and he's like, well, show's over, because the whole show was her trying to masquerade as this person who belongs in this place that she doesn't. And so I think maybe that's it, is you're waiting for that reveal. It happens, and then there's like 5 or 6 more episodes of stuff.
Right. Well, let me ask you guys this question, right? Because that kind of made me think. Did anyone else have this experience where you see the point system that they have? Like, here's like, okay, cool, you get 2,000 points for walking your neighbor's dog, and 20,000 points for donating to charity, and minus 8 points for listening to Glenn Beck, and all that. It'd be much more than that. But
9 points.
yes. But did you guys have the experience of you tried to count your own points?
Yes.
So I was like,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to kind of mention how this sort of works in the show. What's nice, or the way that Michael Schur sort of pitched this to the executives, was like, he was like, this is not a show about a specific mythology or a Christian religion or anything like that. This is separate from that. And I guess the way that he sort of like came to this idea of the Good Place was that he was driving around in LA and like experiencing daily transactions with people, and he found a lot of their behaviors really irritating. And so what he decided to do was, he was like, what if we kept track of that stuff with like points? Right? And then we would sort of, those would pile on each other. And ultimately, at the end of your life, you would have this point value that was associated with your behaviors. Some of the ones that are from the show that I really enjoyed is like, tell a woman to smile.
oh, God.
Which is like minus 58.83 points. Step carefully over a flower bed. You get 2.09 points, positive points. So ruin opera with boorish behavior, minus 90 points, right? So there's like a whole bunch of like these really creative, really interesting pieces that sort of karmically build over the course of your life. And then you kind of have to, resolve that. And part of what's funny about it is like, from what we know about it at the beginning, like only 1% of the people on the planet end up in heaven.
Probably even less. Did they say 1%? Or
I think they say about 1%, and that have ever lived there, right? And in their community, there's like 332 people who are now there, who all died around the same time. Sort of the idea of the story. And part of what was interesting about it is like, how is this heaven if we have this sort of arbitrary point-based system, right? Like, Tahani was able to get in because she was selfish enough. Like, she wanted to be so famous that she kept donating to charities. That was the way that she sort of became important over the course of the show. And so it was really confusing as a viewer to kind of be like, wow, they're really playing with these notions of what it means, goodness, and sort of philosophically what these things mean over the course of the first season.
Well, it's sort of like this utilitarian, right? Like kind of expectational rule of like, you have this total net sum of like all the good things you did and all the bad things you do. And I think, especially in the Western world, we sort of think of it as like, yeah, I do shitty things to people all day long, but I'm a good person because, X, Y, and Z, like I donated to charity, or I
didn't serial kill today.
Yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right. I don't kill. I don't, I don't steal from people. And we think of these large objects, but it's really fascinating to break it down of like, hey, here's these 1,000 microtransactions you had today. Like, oh, you tipped the waiter just a little too little, or you tipped the waiter really well, or you didn't hold the door open for this person, or, those little things, like you squashed a bug that you didn't need to squash. And it's kind of Buddhist in that way of like your soul becomes lighter or heavier based on your karmic, not that they have like that mythology, but it pulls from, so
all
many different thoughts
stuff
of the afterlife.
Well, and there's part of me that thinks that this show couldn't exist in any other kind of political climate, because the idea sort of is that like there's these microaggressions that you participate in with the people that are around you, and that those actually matter and have weight and aren't just something that sort of dissipates. Those are the things, those are the moments when you earn your points, right? It's not just these big choices that we make.
Yeah. Well, and it's fascinating how, unlike, obviously probably, the Judeo-Christian ethos is what we deal with on the most daily basis, right? There's no avenue for forgiveness that they talk about in The Good Place. It's just, you either did good or bad, and it doesn't matter, how you feel about that now, or, if you're sorry. It's like, you just...
Well, and that you had to do really good.
Yeah.
Right? Talk about we are the 99%. That's sort of what the show is about, is that ultimately, like, only a handful of people will make it into the good place, right? And that everybody else goes to the bad place. So even if you were, like, as Eleanor says, a medium person, right? She kind of did shitty things, but she never did anything really, really bad.
She lived in Arizona her whole life.
Yeah, right? Like...
minus 50 points.
Jason Mendoza, who masquerades as Jianyu for several episodes, right? The judge comes and he's like, oh, he's from Florida. He belongs in the bad place. Like, all he did was live in Florida. Right. And so I think it's really interesting how they structure it of like, you can be a decent person, right? You can be an average, middle of the road. You do some good stuff. You do some bad stuff. You donate to charity. You leave that empty cup outside your car instead of throwing it away, right? You can do these random things and you're ultimately still going to end up in the bad place unless you live an extraordinary life, which I find really stressful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I
We're
actually
all going to the bad place.
I legitimately, as Scott was saying earlier, I started counting my points. Like I was sitting there going like, am I making enough points? Like his show shifted my framework of my day-to-day experience.
The Church of Michael Schur.
Seriously. Well, and it's kind of funny because, and this is part of what I also want to talk about. Like, they name drop so many philosophers in this show. They talk about Aristotle, they talk about Plato, they talk about Kant, they talk about a whole bunch of
Euclid, I think.
Yeah, they get John Stuart Mill gets like a whole 4 minutes. And it's weird to see like a Victorian political commentator, social commentator on a show right now in TV. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this is just that. So a lot of shows try and do very like complex stuff like that. The one that comes to mind from like my Joss Whedon verse experience is Dollhouse, which was a terrible show on so many different levels. Like it never succeeded at what it was trying to do. It was trying to do some really interesting things. Playing with like Lockean notions of identity, and all that stuff. And Michael Schur's show is engaging with those questions, but he's doing it well. Yeah.
Well, I think probably the best vehicle for that is Chidi. Right? I love the quotes like, well, this is why no one likes moral philosophers. But like he's able to sort of be like that, like, hey, these are these really complex moral ideas. Eleanor's this straight person who's like, I've never even heard of John Stuart Mill. Like, who is this person? And he kind of translates that for the audience. Like, so this is who this person was in a nutshell. This is what they said. And it's very digestible, I think, and that's sort of what's successful about it, is people can engage with these very small moral conundrums that we all deal with. And I love how it speaks to those moral conundrums of like, cool, if I don't help you, I'm being honest and benefiting the good place. If I do help you, then I'm assisting this person I've promised to do, and I'm helping my fellow man. And that's kind of what I really loved about the good place, is these just very simple but incredibly complex and difficult to get through morality questions. What do you do? What would you do in this situation?
Well, and that's sort of what's interesting too. They throw out all these interesting tidbits like, so only one American president ever made it into the good place. It's Abraham Lincoln, and it's only because he ended slavery. Right? Like, that's the one reason. You barely. Like,
that got you like a million points.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only because he signed that particular document that he ends up in the good place, right? So there's, like, tons of little tidbits like that. And it kind of, like, for me, there was a little bit of anxiety as I was watching the show. I was like, okay, when is this going to start to get old, right? And then there was this massive twist at the end of the show. And I haven't seen or experienced a twist like this. So if you have not watched it, go watch it first before you
stop this recording now.
Please stop, because like you gotta experience this. Even I knew there was a twist. Ashley came into the office and she was like, "Oh my gosh, this thing happened," and I was like, "Okay, I went to go sit down, and I was like, okay, what's it gonna be? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
There's no
I couldn't
tells
call
at
it.
all.
I'm usually really, really good about being able to like, cool, this is about to happen. I walk into a movie, go, okay, all of them are going to die. And then I'm right. But this I did not see coming.
Not until Ted Danson laughed
Right.
did I realize.
Even when she says it, I'm like, oh, he's going to laugh it off as like being like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Okay, this is the point of no return. If you have not seen the twist yet, please pause now.
Thelma and
come back
Louise, you were
later.
about to fly off the
shirt
canyon.
balls.
Holy forking shirt balls. They're actually in the bad place. All 4 of these people are in the bad place. So Tahani, Chidi, Jason/Jianyu, and Eleanor are the only 4 people in the good place, which is actually just the bad place designed to look like the good place where they can psychologically torture each other for eternity while being laughed at by demons.
Which is just amazing. I love it so much. And what I think is interesting is like all this stuff that we've talked about, all this stuff we've set up about how the good place works. I don't know that any of it's true because they could have just been lying.
Yeah.
Like, no, there is no point system. It's just like we just pick, or there is no good place. All human beings go to the bad place because no one has achieved the level of karmic purity to go there other than maybe like the Dalai Lama.
Right. Well, and the notion that heaven can mess up, right? Like that idea in and of itself sort of spawns this whole anxiety that's present through that whole first season. I mean, it's so perfectly executed in the ways that it provokes that anxiety and plays with our own humiliation, our own tenseness about what it means to be good. How do we define these things? Is there a clear binary system by which we become good people, you know? And then to have that inevitably flipped, man, that's just postmodern as hell. So
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, and I think like that's the such interesting place. Like when they talk about like, is there a middle place, right? When you talk about that binary, right? Like morality is all about how we act relative to each other. So if I kill someone one day, it's bad. If I kill a different guy a different day, I'm a hero, right? So the act itself, you know, doesn't actually matter. So it's all about the context that exists around it, and which is why I love the fact like Chidi is like, I did all these charity things and I was a good person. It's like, yeah, but you literally tortured everyone around you with your indecision.
right.
Or Tahani, you know, you were selfish. Everything you did was for the wrong reasons. Jason lived in Florida. We all know why he went to hell. And Eleanor is obvious. I swear to God, when she abandoned that dog, I was like, whatever happens to you, you deserve it. How dare you do that? That poor pupper.
fat dog.
I thought he was going to die. I'm glad they played it for a joke of him getting super fat because I couldn't handle it if she'd killed the dog. If she'd killed the dog, I never could have gone back.
I
to
always
agree
think
with
that
her.
that's like such a fascinating thing that's the point of no return for most
Oh, she
people.
could have killed like 3 kids and I would have been fine. But kill a dog, kill a cat, a dog, a horse, I'm done.
Yep.
I write you off.
I second that.
I think that's, I mean, okay, so we'll end differently there. But yeah, no, I think that the show just, it's so fascinating. By the way, I think Chidi is my, like,
Spirit animal?
no, or he is me in so many ways.
That's so problematic, Jess.
I know. Well, it's kind of problematic because of, you know, he's a moral philosopher, but he's so indecisive. Like there's this whole section where they're talking about his thesis and how terrible it is and how hard he's worked on it. And I was having like mental flashbacks to my thesis defense while they were having that conversation. I was like, you are so right. This is garbage. Throw it in the garbage.
It's truly a double-edged sword because on the one hand, I think if you have participated in academic life in any way, if you go to conferences or you write or you've done a thesis or you've defended something, you know, there is a part of Chidi that is identifiable. Like if I said I didn't identify with him, I'd be lying. But at the same time, why do we keep portraying academics this way? Like he's such a fundamentally useless character in a lot of different ways. He's a great teacher. That is his caveat, right? At the end, they say, like, you couldn't write for crap, but he was able to explain utilitarianism and consequentialism and the allegory of the cave
Eleanor gets better, right?
Yeah,
and
she does.
That's the huge part that's the most
But he's
important.
also a bad person who ended up in the bad place because his ability to know things made him unbearable. And so it's a very strange thing to analyze in terms of, like, how we're portraying academics in popular culture on television. It's usually bad.
Oh, yeah.
And
well,
like Chidi is not an exception here.
right. And I think that that's largely a critique of the information age, right? Like, I think that sort of overwhelming amount of knowledge and useless knowledge is a really big anxiety that we all sort of end up sharing. And so I think that that's part of it. I think there's a degree to which Tahani is really about sort of narcissism and self-reflective. She is the selfie person who is obsessed with celebrity, obsessed with, right? So I think that there are these kind of different mirrors that are sort of interacting with that. I think it's really interesting too, because like Kristen Bell's character, by the way, her performance in this is so amazing. She's one of my...
It's a departure from where I've seen her go in the past, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed so she is so terrible as this character, so awful, and she just says most of the things so off the cuff and just without thinking about them, that it's sort of shocking. She was great in Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Yes.
But I think that this is sort of an extension of that performance, and it really clicks very well, and I think she does a great job. And there's a lot more sort of intention to her her awfulness, I think, in a way.
Well, I think what's great is there's this recognition, like each of the characters, like they obviously have the arc that they follow, and I wonder, like looking back, like how much of their time in the bad place is almost kind of a because obviously like they're torturing them, right? They're torturing them with the greatest problems. Like Eleanor's consequences literally manifest around her because she never dealt with them. You know, Chidi is forced to choose between 3 different women who all have declared their love for him, and it's the ultimate conundrum for a person of his type. You know, and I wonder how much of it is sort of like this idea of like, cool, you are working through the sins of your past until you get past them, right?
Well, and so that's part of what I want to talk about just for a second too, is like, so we end with this massive twist where we find out they're in the bad place. Not only that, but we get a memory wipe. So they're starting from zero again. How is that entertaining television? Like, aren't they just going to say the same things over and over to each other?
She left herself that note, you see. So
right.
What the heck is a Chidi?
Right.
That's what.
But at the same time, it's sort of like, so there are going to be pieces of overlap. And it's one of those concerns that I have about these kind of high concept shows that are trying to push boundaries, right?
See, but I think you're only going to see that in the first episode.
What?
I think you're only going to see that in the first episode, though.
Maybe.
Played for like, cool. It's going to play out almost like, because they already kind of did it. They played it out the same except for the small differences.
Right.
I think you're going to see that in the first episode of season 2, and then you're going to see divergence.
I don't know. It's interesting to consider because, like, essentially these demons are omnipotent, right? Like, they control everything. So how is this a show or an exercise in, like, anything but fatalism?
Sure. Well, I think that kind of gave me a healthy dose of anxiety, and I'm not an anxious person, but thinking like, cool, you are now trapped in a perpetual loop of hell.
Right.
A hell you are not aware of. Human beings can deal with anything, right? It's like, cool, I'm going to be, strapped to a chair and electrocuted while they, roast my feet. That's something I can deal with. I have all of the relevant data. I will live with this
That's
hell.
casual.
Right. But like this idea of like, I'm perpetually anxious, I think it speaks to like our generation's fears of like, we're not actually afraid of getting hurt or getting sick. We're afraid of the things we're afraid of. Like, I have all this anxiety, I have all this depression, and they just constantly have to deal with that. You are constantly, the night before your paper's due, still having had not done your paper.
Right.
That's where you exist, is that level of procrastination and dread.
Yeah. And so the fact that this is a comedy, you know what I mean? That this is where we go for respite from the world, right? Like, these are...
No wonder we're so messed up.
Yeah. It's fundamentally interrogating who we are as people. So I actually think this is like... So if we're going to give this a grade, like for me, this is an A. This is a solid A. I think it's a really good show. I'm really interested to see where it ends up going in the second season, because potentially it could all fall apart. I mean, that's how carefully constructed I have found this particular thing to be. I think the humor is a little bit funky in this show.
And that's that's why I give it an A-. I think that a lot of the elements are there, but they're not cohering the way they need to be. And so there's always some stuff that's kind of weird, kind of disjointed. I still have an issue with the pacing. Maybe that's something I'll get over in time, but it was just deeply irritating to me sometimes where I'm like, I have to wait a week? And it wasn't like a positive, like, oh, that was so great, now I can move on, the getting my hit or whatever. But it was absolutely frustrating. But I think some of the humor, some episodes are like laugh out loud funny, and then other ones I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my god, what is this?
I think, yeah, I agree with the pacing struggles, right? And like, because I could binge it, there were things that you can get over. I feel like, especially with binging, you're essentially just watching a 12-hour movie.
Yeah.
So
a slow 12-hour movie.
You're watching Titanic's extended edition 4 times.
Dear God.
I know, that's my hell.
It's actually an okay movie.
Yeah, if you don't count every other movie. So I'm gonna give this an A, but just barely, because I felt like for me it's funny, it's thoughtful, and I can forgive some of the structural and awkward moments because I feel like it's gotten me to think and evaluate the world in a different way than any other show. So it's incredibly unique and it's thoughtful. And that kind of bumps it up for me.
I agree. Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, and I'm really excited to see how these characters change and grow in a place where they supposedly can't.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's like, what's the point of growing, right? But that's the fascinating thing is like, they always say, like, as human beings, we can never know what's in the afterlife. Well, hell, even when you're in the afterlife, you will never know what's going to be in the afterlife.
Exactly. So, okay, so I kind of want to end this, thing with what you're watching this week. What are you excited about right now?
So I'm excited. I'm about to be starting Iron Fist. I'm not sure how it is going in. I loved. I honestly go back in my rankings of the other Marvel shows because I was like, cool, Jessica Jones talked in this social way about these issues that are so important and dear to so many people and need to be talked about. And Luke Cage was all about style and so cool, and like, this is about the Black experience and the idea of your neighborhood being where you are and who you are. And Daredevil's just slick and cool and one of my favorite like crime dramas. Like,
plus the fight sequences in that show are just
it's
insane.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And so I always go back. I think probably Luke Cage is my favorite, but I watched it most recently, so I think maybe Jessica Jones is the best, but Daredevil's the one I enjoy watching the most. And I'm scared because I'm going into Iron Fist hearing so many bad things.
Yeah.
That it's just not. I was like, all right, I'm praying.
It started in a really bad place, and so my thought was like, it can only go up from there, but apparently it's not clearing the bar.
It just looks a lot like Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
It's like white guy discovers East Asian awesomeness.
Right.
And that's
or every superhero movie recently. I mean, the Christopher Nolan's Batman was the same thing. It's not.
I went to Korea and had a white
Iron Man,
Irish guy.
Iron Man too, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the Hulk went to Brazil.
Okay.
So
that's different, right?
Yeah, right hemisphere, right?
Yeah.
And he just did it to bottle soda. Because South America has nothing to offer us culturally.
No.
It's not like it's a wondrous place with varying cultures and interesting people. It's just a place for Stanley to get poisoned by dirty soda filled with the blood of Edward Norton. Who isn't even Hulk anymore.
Edward Norton.
My apologies to the Edward Norton family and the Christopher Nolan family. I'm so sorry.
None of them are listening. No. So
listening.
I'm going to do something completely different, and I actually am watching the season 3 of the originals.
Oh no!
Yes,
really?
yes, I am. No, so it premiered this past week. Season 3 of the originals
Oh
premiered
dear,
this past week. So for some context, okay, it is a spin-off of the Vampire Diaries, but it's 10 times the show. Vampire Diaries is a terrible show, and I will offer that up willingly. It is not a good show. It's tired, and it's very deeply the CW. But the originals is a spin-off, and it has the vampire werewolf witch thing going on, but it's way less about who's kissing Who this week, and way more about like mythology and supernaturalism and turf wars. And I really like it because it gets into the nitty gritty of monster mythologies, especially because the whole show takes place in New Orleans, which has a lot of historical, cultural mythologies just in and of itself. And so I really appreciate that part of it. The historicism of it all is really cool. And so it just premiered its 3rd season, and it was violent.
The best kind of premiere.
Yay!
A lot of hearts got ripped out of chests with bare hands. So that's where I'm going to leave you guys.
Great visual. Thank you.
Jess?
So I'm going to do my typical Anglophile thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2 shows that I watched that are related to each other, and not by production or design, but by content. I watched Victoria this week, and I also watched The Crown. And can I say, The Crown is a far superior show. It's so excellent. It's so interesting. I love all of the performances in it, the discussion of the politics and the history. Basically, Victoria, which is the story of, Queen Victoria, is like a kind of a bodice ripper, but Victorian, so you don't even get that part. I mean, there are parts where guys rip their shirts in order to be sexy. The shirt ripping actually does happen.
Do you know how long it takes to make a shirt?
That's what I'm saying.
They're irresponsible
I
here.
thought it was terrible. I was disappointed.
I think that's why in the 20th century evolved to the slow unbuttoning.
They're just out of touch with the common folk. I think that was the point of the shirt ripping. So
You're the 99% who wear terrible shirts.
That is correct. So
if your shirt's ripping, you need new shirts.
Exactly. So I thought there's an episode of The Crown that is about a painting. And those are some of my favorite kinds of episodes of television that are so zeroed in and so concentrated and so about that historical moment and the artifacts that are left behind. So if you get a chance, The Crown, man, it's beautiful.
Think... So they ordered like 6 or 7 seasons about each decade of her life.
Oh my God.
They spent like $100 million on it. It's crazy. Do you think that show, because I mean, it's amazing. It's so good. I think, did it win?
She won Best Actress.
Yeah, and it won, I think, for Best, there's some Golden Globe. But do you think that it's going to keep up? Do you see that as happening?
Because what happens over those next years in Britain are so incredible and so interesting. And her life, what she has seen over the course of her life is just fantastic. And that's what's so great about The Crown, is it's about her, but it's also about the people. And it's about the country, and it's about the government, and it's about politics. And it's a show, like, for me, it was very satisfying because it was a show for women that involved all these different elements and was deeply complex and domestic at the same time. And I just found that to be a deeply satisfying experience.
Well, and if we're being honest, America loves learning about British royalty.
Seriously.
So, like,
we all kind of want to be British
royalty,
subjects again.
I think we should just go back. I think we did our best.
We repatriate.
No, it's so that's I think that's where we're at with that. It's America living out their monarchic dreams.
So, thanks for joining us this week on UniversiTV. You can check us out at Facebook at UniversiTV Podcast. You can also check us at UTV podcast. No, what is it, Ash?
UTV Podcast.
UTV Podcast at Twitter. On Twitter. I don't know. I'm not that cool. And also, you can email us at universitypodcast@gmail.com. So, or universitytvpodcast@gmail.com. Did I say that twice? How many times did I say it?
I think you said it enough. Is the general consensus.
I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible. Ashley, just do it. Just do it, Ash.
Be sure to check us out on all of our social medias. You can like us on Facebook at UniversiTV Podcast or on Twitter at UTV Podcast. That's our handle. You can also email us at universitytvpodcast@gmail.com with recommendations for future episodes.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Way to go, Ashley.
That was much better.